Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the next important lecture for RC01, Theory and Practice in Sociology, in association with the Department of Sociology, Nagaland University. So today we are having a very important theme to discuss, and I'm sure all of us, whether we are in academia or in other fields of work, we are engaging and we are finding ourselves in the middle of this very unique, important, strange, very useful, very creative, and also bringing lots of challenge for us. This is about artificial intelligence and the AI, particularly in the context of academia, in social research, in sociological writing, in formulating research, in articulating analysis of data and whatnot. So this is something that we all are engaging with, and there is a multiple writings already. Scholars in social science, they are trying to understand and engage how to use it, how far it is creative, how far it is taking on the role of human, how far we can remain original, authentic while still using AI in our work, and how do students engage with it, whether they are in masters or at research level. And today, to speak on some of these burning issues and questions for us, we have Dr. Tiatemsu Longkumer, who is a senior lecturer at the Department of Anthropology at Royal Thimphu College, Bhutan. Uh, Dr. Tiatemsu has been working on themes of indigenous religion, particularly on the question of Christianity among the Nagas of Nagaland, and also he is now shifting to the study of Buddhism in Bhutan. And then there is a different field that he has been working and engaging, that is AI in research, AI in teaching, AI in learning, and engaging with technology and society as a broad framework to talk about these new changes in terms of academic writing. So welcome, Dr. Tiatemsu Longkumer, for our
Yes.
special lecture series. We can take around 40 minutes, and then
Yeah.
after your lecture, we can take in some questions and answers. We can have some discussion on AI, and we can
Yes.
take many questions from scholars as well.
Yeah.
So floor is yours.
Yes. Yeah. Thank you very much. I hope everyone can hear me. It's a wonderful privilege to be here to speaking to all of you, and I think it's a topic which is of very much of interest to me and something which I've been working on. What I will do in the presentation is, first of all, initially I'll talk about something about generative AI. Again, I'll be talking about generative AI in terms of the users. How do we understand generative AI as a user? I'll talk about that. After that, I'll move to this aspect of how do we actually rethink this idea of, again, I'll not specifically be talking on education per se. I mean, I'll work a lot on teaching and learning practices, but since today specifically is on research, so I'll talk about this idea of cognitive offloading and, cognitive friction and all of those. And then I move to some aspect of research as such. So it'll be in that sequence. Hopefully I get many questions from the audience here. I'll try to keep it as brief as possible so that I'll try again take more questions from you all. Now, having said that, I think one of the things that is very much important to remember in terms of this presentation is, again, in this 1 hour or one and a half hour conversation, we will not be able to solve everything in terms of how to, in terms of the how to, what, why question of generative AI in research and all. But one thing that I'm hoping for is that through this conversation, it can spark some questions and it can spark some way of thinking and doing things. So that is something which I'm really very much hoping for through this conversation, right? And so another thing with generative AI, again, has to do with a lot of hands-on practice. And today, obviously, we will be sitting and discussing about this idea. But one of the important aspects of learning about generative AI is actually sitting and using it. So again, that is one of the important aspects which we will not be doing today. Hopefully, in the days to come, we'll be able to do that. But today, we will be discussing that idea. So let me straight away go into the conversation that we are going to have today. Again, in our institution, we have a center called Center for Innovative Teaching and Learning. Hopefully, you can all see the slides. So I've been part of the Center for Innovative Teaching and Learning. I've been working or collaborating with Center for Innovative Teaching and Learning for 2.5 years, and I've been working with them a lot in terms of how to integrate generative AI in teaching and learning practices. And so this is my 2.5 years of research and work with the Center for Innovative Teaching and Learning, and which again is something which is of very much interest to me. And so again, the reflection and writing that I have comes from this center, and also from the experiments that I've done in my classroom with the students, but also at the same time something that which I have also personally applied in my work and in my research. And so in terms of generative AI, again, in terms of teaching and learning, I've written on it. You can actually have a look at my written works later on. Now, specifically coming to generative AI comes under this aspect of what is known as machine learning. Now, this is something which is very important. The idea of machine learning is very important because obviously the word learning is there, and so it kind of suggests that, okay, softwares, the softwares that we use or the machines that we use can actually learn. And so when we talk about machine learning as such, again, let me give you a simple example. It's something like this, where when you use Instagram, you scroll through Instagram. Now, your behavior in Instagram, no human person is monitoring your behavior in Instagram. It is just software system that is actually monitoring your behavior. What kind of videos do you like? What kind of pictures do you like? And all of those things are monitored by software systems. And those software systems are being trained to monitor each of your behavior in certain kind of pictures, videos, and all of those things. And that is how this social media platform learns your likes, dislikes, and everything as such. And so machine learning comes under this kind of aspects as such. But again, when we talk about machine learning as such, there are different kinds of machine learning, because again, you might have seen, autonomous cars as such, cars without a driver which can run autonomously. You might have seen robots in the sense. You might, again, the example that I gave of social media. Now, all of this again works on some kind of machine learning as such. It has actually learned how to navigate the world around us, right? A robot learns how to navigate the world around us, and that is how the robot navigates and does what the robot does in that sense. So the idea here is that, again, there's different kinds of machine learning, and generative AI comes under one of that kind of machine learning, which is actually kind of foundationally based on this idea of what is known as neural network, right? So today's generative AI is actually foundationally stands on the base of what is known as neural network. Now, neural network in other terminology is also called deep learning. Now, as the word suggests, neural network, the word is actually kind of taken out from how human brain function, because the idea is that human brain has certain kind of networks, and through this network, again, human beings can actually gain knowledge, have memories, and all of those things, and can retrieve memories and all. Now, with the generative AI, what is happening here is this, right? When you look at the initial form of generative AI that we have had when ChatGPT-3 first came out, in neural network, what this generative AI system does is that it kind of converts the words into numbers in that sense. For example, let's just give an example. Let's say I love dogs. Now, let's say the word I love is represented by number 1 and dogs are represented by number 2. Now, neural network understands your sentences that way. And so what happens is that neural network, in that sense, this system, right, generative AI systems is being trained by the information that is there in the internet, in that sense, right? So in the internet, wherever the word dog is there, the number 2 will be assigned to that word. So again, remember, this neural network again is being trained by information that are there in the internet, or initially it was trained by the information that is there in the internet. And how it again understands any kind of text is that it assigns a number to a text. And this is where what happens in neural network is a neural network does a lot of calculations as such. Very complex calculations, right? Again, I'll not go into that aspect, but then again, it does calculations and actually give you the answer. And so this is where whenever you put any query to generative AI, what it does again is that it kind of converts, the words to the number it has been assigned to, and then it kind of calculates it accordingly and then spits it out. Again, this is an important aspect of how, again, neural network functions as such. Now, this is where you might have noticed that when generative AI first came out, which was GPT-3, you might have noticed whenever you put any query there, it will actually give you answer one word by other word, right? It will go one word by the other word. Again, today, obviously, when you type any query as such, it can give you one paragraph at one go also. But then when GPT-3 came out, it went one word per the other word. Again, why it is doing so is because it is actually calculating what word to give next, in the sense, depending on the training data that it had, right? And so this is where one of the important aspects, and one of the things that people talk about here is that, okay, generative AI is just a calculation machine. And it's true to an extent, but it's a very complex calculative machine in the sense it's not a simple calculative machine. But some years ago, Google came up with this paper. The title of the paper, as you can see, is "Attention is All You Need." So this is the title of the paper. And what Google argued in this paper was that you can actually let generative AI understand the meaning of a word, right? So before, GPT-3 didn't actually really understand the meaning of the word as such. It was actually spitting out, again, calculative, answers as such. And this is where Google argued that, okay, you can actually let generative AI understand the meaning of the word. And this is what they call as transformers. And so in neural network, now the idea of transformer was introduced to this aspect of, again, what we looked at as neural network. And this is where Google introduced this idea of transformers. Now, let me go into this idea of transformer a little bit, because this is something which is very important. Now, let's say you are explaining how to identify a cat to someone who has never seen a cat in his or her life. Let's just say you are explaining, right, how to identify a cat to someone who has never seen a cat. Now, what you will do is that you will list what are the features of cat, right? 1, 2, 3, 4 features. And then the other thing that you will list is that how to identify or differentiate cat from all the other animals. And so you will actually, again, specify certain things there. And similarly, this neural network also works on this idea of embeddings, where every word is being given a vector, and each vector represents what it is and what it is not, in that sense. And that is how this paper, "Attention is All You Need," argued that a generative AI system can actually, a neural network can actually understand the meaning of the word or the context in which the word is being used. And so this is where now generative AI has transformed into a mere calculative machine to now, again, meaning understanding and context understanding machine, because of the coming of transformers, where Google produced this paper called as "Attention is All You Need." Now, without, again, going into this further, now, one of the things that is very much talked about in terms of generative AI is this idea of hallucinations as such. Again, one of the reasons why hallucination, again, the word hallucination means obviously giving wrong responses, right? And so generative AI tend to give incorrect or wrong responses, or, whenever you ask any kind of questions. Now, why generative AI tends to give, again, wrong responses is also because, again, apart from many reasons, one of the reasons is because it is trying to be creative, and that is something which is very important as such. For example, now, as I've told you, these generative AI systems are being trained by the information that is there in the internet, right? And you ask a question, and the answer to that question is not there in the internet, let's say. But then the generative AI will actually try to give you an answer, and it will try to give you a very confident, creative answer, in that sense. And so this is where the idea of hallucinations came into the picture here. Now, when you look at generative AI models today, right, and which was actually kind of recently been put out, ChatGPT 5.2 and Gemini 3, these are all models which actually came out recently only, right? A month or two ago, it all came out. When you look at all of those very recent models, which you have to actually pay $20 to use, what happened with these newer models is that these newer models do not really hallucinate as such. And this is very interesting thing about generative AI in terms of, this aspect of hallucination as such. So again, let me tell you again, hallucination is where generative AI tends to give you wrong responses. Why hallucination happens? One of the reasons is because generative AI tries to be creative in the sense, right? And so this is where obviously this platform, this organization, companies and all try to work out with this. But one of the things that they work out, or they try to work on in terms of how to not let generative AI, has hallucinate is this idea of embeddings as such, right? Now, you might have noticed that whenever you open any kind of generative AI platform, there's an option to do search, right? And it automatically goes to internet and search for the answer to the query that you have actually asked. And so that is one of the capability that generative AI have today in that sense, right? Generative AI has the capability to actually go to the internet and search information and then bring it back to you. Now, that was something when ChatGPT 3 first came out, that was something which was not there with ChatGPT 3. Because again, people were still developing generative AI, and ChatGPT 3 only work on the information, training information that it has only been trained by, and didn't have any other information beyond that. But today, obviously, generative AI has the capability to go to internet and search, right? So that is one of the important aspect thing the generative AI have gained today and has the ability to do. And that is one of the reason why, again, hallucination is very much minimized in terms of generative AI as such, right? But then another thing that is very much important in terms of generative AI is this idea of RAG, what is known as retrieval augmented generation. Now, there's been a lot of talks and discussion on this idea of, okay, if generative AI has been trained by certain kind of information that is there in the internet, then will it not be biased towards certain kind of information? Because it will only have information through certain kind of information that it has been trained by. And this is something which, again, was of important discussion and debate early on when generative AI came out also. And this is something which, again, the makers of generative AI try to solve, right? And another problem with generative AI, again, is that, okay, if you train generative AI with certain kind of information as such, but then let's say I have certain kind of information which generative AI is not being trained by. Can I use that information to do my work, right? That was also one of the big question that, again, these creators or maker of this generative AI was dealing with. And this is where they came up with this idea of RAG, right? Retrieval augmented generation. And this is, the idea here is, again, this is a very simple idea today if you really look at it, but then again, this is a very phenomenal and interesting idea. I mean, to create this, obviously, it takes a lot of research and all, right? And so the idea, if you open any kind of generative AI, platform you might have seen, you can actually attach documents there, right? You can either attach a book or any kind of PDF document or any kind of document, and you can ask a query on the document itself, and generative AI can give you answer on the document, right? And this is where the idea of RAG comes in, where generative AI has the ability to read information that has been fed in to the system, right? And to understand the information. So let's say you put in a very complex academic paper, let's say, a paper which is not there in the internet, but let's say you have written the paper, or someone has written the paper, it's not there in the internet. But then if you put in the paper and ask generative AI about the arguments that are there in the paper, concepts that are used in the paper, generative AI understands it, can break it down, and also at the same time, do whatever things that we do with the paper, any kind of research paper as such. And so generative AI over the years has gained that ability to do RAG, right? Retrieval augmented generation as such. And so this is one of the, again, very important capability of generative AI. Now, let me again recap this, right? Generative AI works on this idea of neural network. But Google introduced this idea of what is known as transformers. The idea here is that generative AI can understand the meaning of the word and the context in which it is being used. Then later on, they introduced this idea of generative AI can use go and search the internet. And then later on, they introduced this idea of RAG, wherever if you put in new information, knowledges, and all, generative AI can understand that, and you can use it for your own purpose. So that is one of the important aspects of development in generative AI that is there in terms of how generative AI functions. Now, let me go to prompting. again, see, prompting is something which is not difficult as such, but I think something which needs attention also. Because when you look at generative AI systems as such, there are different kinds. See, generative AIs are models, different kind of models that are there. Right? For example, JGPT-4 is also a model. JGPT 5.2 that we use today is also a different kind of model. And all of these models has different kind of knowledge, right? And so each generative AI model will have all kinds of knowledges. A model will have all kinds of knowledges, right? Knowledge on any kind of discipline, any kind of fields as such. And this is where, when you are interacting with a generative AI, you are interacting with that model, right? When you're asking any query, when you're asking something to do, or when you're, searching for any kind of information, you are actually, dealing with that model as such. And so what you write, the query that you put in, is very important in order to, again, retrieve the right kind of information, or to let generative AI behave the way you want it to behave, in that sense. And so this is where prompting is something which is very important, to retrieve the right kind of information, and also at the same time to let generative AI behave the way you want it to behave. And this is where I try to think about prompting as, interacting with someone who actually have a lot of knowledge as such, but as long as you do not ask the right question, you will never get a proper response, something like that, right? And so this is where prompting becomes very important. The idea of, whatever the text, any text that you put in your generative AI platform, this is a process of prompting as such. And so that is why there are different types of prompting that is there. People learn about these different types of prompting as such. And I think it is good to know, different structures and kinds of promptings that are there, again, in order to kind of help us understand how we, again, navigate through this system. Now, today, obviously, I'll not go through all of this prompting as such, but one of the first kind of prompting is a zero-shot prompting, where you directly ask a question. I want an answer to this. I want a definition of this. That is not a zero-shot prompting, right? But then again, there are different other type of prompting where you actually go and say, okay, this is something that I want. I want it in this kind of structure, or this is an example that I'm providing. Give me your output in the format of the example that I've provided, right? That is another kind of prompting as such. So again, there are different kinds of prompting. You can go and have a look at it. Again, so much of information is there in online. But another thing that I want to talk about is this aspect of reasoning models. So generative AI today, obviously, most of the generative AI that are coming out today is actually reasoning models, right? So there are two types of models in generative AI, reasoning and non-reasoning models. And mostly what happens is, when you pay for any kind of generative AI models as such, any kind of platform as such, you are actually getting the best form, or their latest form of reasoning models as such. And that is why you pay to actually use some of these models in that sense, right? Obviously, the difference between reasoning and a non-reasoning model is something like this, where if you ask a query to a non-reasoning model, it will directly go through whatever information that it is being trained by, and it will directly give you an output, right? On the contrary, when it comes to reasoning model, as the name suggests, when you ask a query, the model itself will ask many more questions to itself, in that sense. So the model will ask to itself, why is this person asking me this question, right? If you're asking something about concept, what are the concepts related to this question, in that sense? And if you have given some context, and again, it will reason itself to itself a lot and try to give you a better and comprehensive answer as such. And that is where, difference between reasoning and non-reasoning models as such, in the sense, right? And again, this is one of the important development in generative AI, in terms of the function of generative AI with the coming of reasoning models as such. Again, reasoning models exist to do scientific work, right? Because non-reasoning model, you can use it for writing, for grammar checking, writing emails or whatever not. But reasoning models, again, very importantly exist to actually analyze very complex scientific work as such. You're working with a concept, you're working with some kind of theories and all of those things. Reasoning model exists to actually think and solve that kind of questions as such. And so those are the different kinds of models that are there. Now, lastly, when it comes to generative AI, one of the important things that exists today is this idea of reinforcement learning or self-consistency as such. The idea here is that now generative AI does not actually depend on information that is there in the internet to actually kind of correct itself or kind of make itself better and better or create newer models in that sense, right? Because now it has the capability to actually generate its own output and then self-improvise itself in that sense. So that has to do with this idea of reinforcement learning or self-consistency as such, that today it does not need the information that is there in the internet as such. Obviously, there's a lot of discussion on this, but I think this is something which is very interesting and important about generative AI self-learning capability that exists within generative AI, right? So having said that, let me come to generative AI and this idea of cognitive work as such, right? So I've talked about generative AI, how generative AI functions, its reasoning capability, and its capability to understand context, and its ability to, again, understand understand the meaning and context of the arguments and all, and its ability to actually reason as such in that sense, right? And its ability to be creative, and also at the same time, its ability to train itself to become better and better model, or to create better models. So hopefully you understand that aspect of generative AI. Again, I'm moving a little fast because of the time constraint, but hopefully yeah, we'll be able to deal with some of this in the Q&A session. Let me go to generative AI and cognitive work. So one of the very important question that is there in terms of generative AI is that, oh, generative AI is not doing anything good to human brain, because again, it actually takes, it is actually a shortcut. And you might have seen this paper by MIT, Your Brain on JGPT. Again, this paper was a headline in newspaper last year. It was very much in the headline, and it was saying, oh, using generative AI, will, decline your cognitive ability or capability as such in the sense, right? Now, I'll not discuss this paper. I'll leave this paper here. But one of the conclusion, or one of the things this paper argues is that, specifically, this paper argues that there are two ways of using generative AI for sure, right? This paper conclusively kind of gives you one way of using generative AI where you actually become dumb by using this generative AI in that sense. But then there is other way of using generative AI, and if you use it that way, it can actually make you much more better than anyone who is not using generative AI in that sense. And so it is also true that using generative AI in certain way can actually make you dumb, or can actually, your cognitive capability will decline in that sense. But on the other hand, it is also true that using it in a certain way can actually make you better than anyone who is not using it in that sense. So that is very important aspect of this paper, or the conclusion of this paper. And this is where, one of the important aspect in terms of human cognitive function is this aspect, and this is something which has been talked a lot in educational circle about using generative AI, is this aspect of cognitive offloading, right? The idea of cognitive offloading is that you are not doing the thing, but you are actually delegating your work to generative AI. For example, if a student is being given a work to write an example, a student can easily to write an essay, the student can easily generate the essay using generative AI, and a very good essay. And so that aspect, that idea is known as cognitive offloading as such, right? And another idea that exists is this idea of cognitive friction as such. And again, the idea of cognitive friction has to do with that. Again, if you are writing an essay without, using generative AI, then you will have to download a lot of materials, go to the library, and then you'll have to read some books or read some articles from the internet, and then only you can actually write that essay, right? But then generative AI does away with all of those things, because if you are writing something with generative AI, you are not reading the book, you are not going through the articles that are there in the internet, any of those. You're actually relying on generative AI to do the work, right? And this is where I want to talk about technology and its impact on how human being, live in that sense, right? See, when we think about writing, language that we have, all of those are technology. When you talk about industrial revolution, even, a lot of technology came into. See, anytime any technology comes in, it actually changes how human being works function and how human beings cognitively function as such with the coming of technology. But generative AI is a very different kind of technology because it kind of poses a question to everything that we human beings have valued and we have been doing in the sense, right? Again, it poses a question to what we have valued throughout human history and how we have been doing things in that sense. And so this is where people are worried about cognitive offloading to generative AI system, or these people are worried about cognitive friction in that sense. Because to create anything, there's no much cognitive friction as such. You can easily create a nice essay using generative AI as such. So this is something which people have been talking about. And one of the things that I talk and argue about is that, okay, with the coming of generative AI, yes, there needs to be some kind of cognitive offloading, and there needs to be some kind of cognitive friction as such in that sense. Right? And that is something which is very important. The question is, how do we do that? Right? So the argument here is not that human beings shouldn't do cognitive offloading, or human beings should care about cognitive friction as such. The thing with generative AI is not that. How do we do cognitive offloading? And how do we go about creating cognitive friction using generative AI is the important thing that needs to be in discussion rather than be afraid of cognitive offloading or cognitive friction as such. And so this is where people talk a lot about this idea of metacognition as such, right? The idea of metacognition is that, when you are doing something, let's say you are actually learning how to write in the sense, you want to become a writer, right? And so there's a process you take, right? You do not just become writer overnight. You take some kind of course, and then you keep on writing and writing and writing, practicing this habit of writing as such in that sense. And that is how you learn the process of writing. By doing it again and again and again and again, you learn how to write well. You learn what are the different kinds of writing that is there, and all of those. And this is this idea of metacognition as such. Something that you practice again and again and again and again to get hold of it, or to understand how it is being created or how it is being done in the sense. Right? And so people are saying that, okay, with the coming of generative AI again, the generative AI is destroying this idea of metacognition as such. But again, and this thing is something which is very important because, again, generative AI kind of hits to the heart of this idea of metacognition, of human process of learning and doing this in that sense, right? Again, we can discuss much about this in the later on, but then the argument that I give, or the thing that I talk about in terms of metacognition, is that, again, we have to rethink how we human beings learn. For example, when we talk about learning writing as such, for example, right? If you want to become a writer in the sense, learning writer. See, today, you do not have to go, you do not have to kind of, take years and years to learn any kind of writing styles or writing as such. You can use generative AI to learn the writing and to apply the writing, because in order to apply any kind of writing also, you do not actually have to write anything by yourself today, in the sense. You just need to know what kind of writing style exists and what are the dynamics that are there in the writing style. And you just need to prompt it, then it'll come out for you in this sense. And so today, people, individuals, or any person shouldn't take years to learn any kind of writing style as such, because it's just a prompt away in the sense. You just need to learn what is the dynamics of that writing style. And this is where one of the capability that generative AI gives you, which we didn't have, or even when we had, it took years and years for people to develop, was that to combine writing styles together in that sense. Today, you can easily combine writings together depending on your creativity in that sense, right? And so now let's come to this idea of research as such, right? Research with generative AI. Now, when we talk about research as such, now, see, generative AI, with the coming of generative AI, we have to redefine our whole research process altogether. And this is a very important aspect that is there. This is something which is not easy, because it will take years for the research process to be redefined, because the professors and teachers need to be trained first, then it will be implemented to the students, and then it will be implemented in any kind of research process as such, right? So institutions whichever institution which have resources to train their professors and to implement this kind of research, again, they will have much more leverage in terms of any kind of implementation of research using generative AI. Now, let's just take a simple example of literature review in research. Now, today, when you talk about JGPT 5.2, which you have to pay and use it in that sense, you can do literature review using that. No, literature review in the sense, I mean, when I was starting, my PhD work, it took me very long time to do literature review. I was sitting in the library, going through books and all of those things. Today, you do not need that to do literature review as such, right? You can bring in any kind of individual, any kind of concept, any kind of literature idea as such, and you can use generative AI to do your literature review. And so that is an important aspect in terms of research as such. But if you know how to use generative AI and take the leverage of generative AI, right, what it gives you is this. For example, let's say you're proposing a research, right, and you have built a hypothesis. Let's say you've already built a hypothesis, you have built some kind of, concepts and some kind of, a crude form of theory that is there, right, and you've already built a hypothesis, but you do not have the data already with you, right? You can actually simulate data, any kind of data or information, and test that hypothesis, which we never had before, which we never could do before, in that sense, before generative AI came, in that sense. So that is one of the leverage that generative AI gives you. Similarly, generative AI gives you the ability to do this also. For example, let's say you have some kind of data or information, right? Good data or information, and you want to test it with different kinds of methodology as such, different kinds of theories, different kinds of concepts. You want to discuss, or you want to actually, apply that. Today's, again, generative AI gives you the capability to do that in that sense. And so now research in a sense is no longer about finding a certain kind of concept or theory or something as such, but it's about testing and driving different kinds of methodology, different kinds of theories and concepts, again, using the information that you already have in the sense. And this is what, right? It actually kind of totally redefined our idea of research as such and how research is being done. Because again, when it comes to social sciences and humanity as such, with whatever research that we are trying to do, we are trying to uncover realities of human beings as such, in the sense, right? Of if you're from anthropology, then you're talking about certain kind of human, everyday activity as such, and all of those things, through which again you're trying to understand human beings better, in that sense, right? And so with generative AI, again, we can actually do all of those. But the thing here is this, right? It's not as easy as it is being said, in that sense, because in order to do this, you will have to know how to prompt well first. You will have to be using paid version of generative AI, which again, you have to pay a lot of money, in that sense. Another thing is, again, you have to know the behavior of models as such, right? Because again, with the coming of each new models as such, all models behave very differently to any kind of queries as such. You'll have to learn that. But also at the same time, right, each model, for example, JGPT 5.2 will behave very differently to different kinds of question in different kind of discipline, let's say. Right? If you're from economics and I'm from anthropology, in that sense, right? With different kind of questions to different kind of discipline, it will behave very differently. We have to learn and understand that also, in that sense, how to use these systems effectively, in that sense, right? So there's a lot of learning that needs to be done, in that sense. But also at the same time, if we can do it, and it gives you a lot of leverage in terms of the process of research as such. So let me keep it till there, and I would be happy to take questions from all of you. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Tia. It was, you can hear me, right?
Yes.
Yeah. Thanks. Thanks a lot for this wonderful presentation, and especially taking us through that technical part, because that's something that I think most of us are not quite aware of. And also thanks for this provocation regarding generative AI and cognitive work. So I would propose that if anybody have any question or comments or observations, please raise your hand. I think that option has been enabled there. As we wait for it, I was wondering whether I could start with a provocation to you, Tia.
Yes.
What does this historical moment signify for us? Because I believe this won't be the first time in human history that we are cognitively offloading, right? Because somewhere this sense of cognition, maybe if permitted, I might use the word epistemic agency, somewhere we have this obsession of having it to be human, right? So we are finding it as a problem because we think cognition and epistemic agency should be purely human. But I mean, is it fair enough demand right now? How do you characterize this historical moment?
Yeah, and that is a very important question that you have raised, because now, you see, we have to rethink everything, because now everything that we have been doing by an individual human, or everything that we have been doing by a human as such, is something which is which is transforming in that sense. And that is why I say generative AI is not unlike any other kind of technology that has actually come before us in that sense, because now generative AI is actually forcing us to collaborate with generative AI to do any kind of work. And this is where now any kind of work that we talk about, any kind of creative work in that sense, in terms of research, creating any kind of theories, concepts as such, any kind of creative work cannot be done, again, without collaborating with generative AI as such. And this is the future in that sense. We have to be collaborating with generative AI. One of the questions that has been raised in terms of research work, right, paper writing, is that can we actually use or put generative AI as co-author? Now, generative AI is in a very nascent stage today. I mean, it can, to a certain extent, if you ask me, I mean, can it act as a research assistant who is, let's say, who has finished a master's in the sense? Then if you ask me, okay, obviously generative AI is much more better than research assistants who have finished a master in that sense. And so that way, again, if you ask me, can generative AI be your co-author in that sense, then I mean, the answer can be yes, but then again, people are not ready to accept this yet. And so we will need some time for society to accept this in that sense, right? And so let it, go through this process, give some time, and then, slowly society will accept this. But again, now the way we work will again have to be collaborative. And so any kind of creative work that we are thinking about have to think about in terms of collaborative sense. Let's say you're coming with a theory, you're thinking about a concept. Now, how can me with the help of generative AI think about this, right? We have to, again, that is our future, right? Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. So now we have two people over here. So I would kindly request you to switch on your video as well when you are asking the question and briefly introduce yourself. So may I start with Vaidya?
Yeah, hello. I'm not putting on my video because my bandwidth is a little low. So
sure. Yeah.
So I'm Shubhangi Vaidya from the Indira Gandhi National Open University. And actually, I would like to know, when you read anything these days, any information that's out there in social media, it could be historical information about events or people or whatever, you get a lot of these things in your social media feed. They're obviously all written or all generated on AI because the writing style is identical. And, the more one sort of sees written work, it all sounds exactly the same. So this entire flattening out of individual style, individual expression, I mean, frankly, I would much rather read a student essay which was full of linguistic errors, because then I'd know that it is something that has been generated by that individual themselves, rather than reading an absolutely perfectly grammatically, correct, but still so sterile and boring, which is, what the output from AI seems to be. I'm sorry, I may sound a little bit harsh. So what do you think about this?
True. No, I mean, today, obviously, we call it as AI slop, right? And this is very interesting because, you see, before the coming of generative AI, if you have seen any kind of well-written, paragraph or written statement as such, you'll be amazed, oh, someone, writing really nicely in that sense. But then with the coming of generative AI, now, generative AI can write well in that sense. And so this is where, now, even people who have written their work themselves are getting accused of using generative AI and writing it in that sense. And that is something which is very interesting, because in history that has never happened in that sense. And with the coming of this technology, right, that is happening. Now, this is very interesting thing about AI slop as such, right? See, something which is like a sentence which has very similar structures and well written as such. You see, for example, right? Let's say you're writing a letter in that sense. Now, letter writing has a certain format, so everyone follows that format to write a letter to write a good letter in the sense, right? You follow a certain format, you learn it to write it in the sense. Now, see, today, that thing has become very cheap, right? Writing a good letter in good format has become very cheap. And so that is how our standard has gone up now, right? Because before generative AI, if someone could actually copy a very good form of letter writing style and put all the information properly there, then we will say, oh, this is a very good writing. But today, we do not say like that with the coming of generative AI, because that copying any kind of well-written letter writing style, as long as you know how letter has been written, that has become cheap now in that sense. And so that is what generative AI is kind of bringing into the society now, and it is actually pushing us towards creating better things. And this is what, right? See, in our human society as such, right? When we talk about AI slope as such, on all of those things as such, right? See, in society as such, or when we look at individuals as such, for example, let's take the example of writing. People generally are not good writers as such, right? There will be only few individuals who are actually good writers among hundreds of people, in that sense. And so this idea of slope, in that sense, right, has always been there in the society. Even before the coming of generative AI, you will see, with the coming of generative AI, the discussion has become very different. But before the coming of generative AI, you actually look for, okay, when someone is writing a letter before the generative AI, you are looking, okay, did this person follow the proper format? Did this person follow, put the information in the proper format? You're looking for that. But with the coming of generative AI, we are not looking for that anymore. You are looking for, did this person write it by themselves or himself or herself using his or her writing style? You see, we human now, kind of automatically are looking for different things in that sense. And that is what, slope has always existed in the society. It's just that now with the coming of generative AI, there's a different kind of slope that exists in that sense, right? And so this is where, now, obviously, we'll have to judge any kind of information from a very different lens now today, in that sense, right? And so, for example, even if you look at LinkedIn and all, people are using generative AI to get a summary of all of those things and put their ideas together and all of those things, right? Ideas and all of those things. And so now, today, we have to look at information from a very different lens or very different perspectives as such, yeah.
Yeah, in fact, Shubhangi's question is very fascinating because now I think we are all bored with the aesthetics in the writing in terms of good, clean, sanitized language. And in fact, now we yearn for mistakes, something quote unquote human in our written text. And somewhere it also propels me to make a small statement on the politics of clarity. I think in all our communication, we are taught to be more clearer and clearer. And that pressure has built it up in such a way that now we seek the tools and make it so that clarity in terms of coherence and composition that we are losing the human touch. So that's an aside. We had Sandeep raising the hand. I can't see him now. So may I request Rashmi Chakrabarti now? Sandeep, are you still there? Do you still want to ask a question?
Yes,
You're
yes.
muted.
I hope I'm audible.
Yeah, you're
Yes,
audible.
yes.
Yeah, thank you, Sandeep.
Yeah. Just adding to the last question, actually, as far as writing is concerned, I think what Tia was telling earlier, that how when industrial revolution came, it completely changed the way technology was looked upon. Like a carpenter, doing and coming up with it with a particular product, and what machine was doing was completely different. So we, at times it was too finished, too good, in compared to what original human production that was done by a carpenter maybe. So same thing is happening in the field of writing today. Is too good to be human. But my problem is, as far as reading is concerned, now you see, as Tia was saying, that now review of literature is so easy compared to the way traditionally we did, going to the library, searching for the book, reading the entire book, trying to comprehend what was there. The advantage that was there in reading original text was that it was not only helping in our that particular research, but also that idea was always there with us, whatever we have absorbed from there, and it helped us in our life. But the problem in our academic, all our future academic exercises, but the problem with AI is that it is doing for that particular prompt that we have given to AI, it will be giving us only that, and it will be doing that thing which we were supposed to do. In the process, we haven't gone through the text, we haven't understood it, we haven't comprehended. It was done by someone else, and this entire thing that is comprehended was done by AI again. So don't you think it reduces our capacity in the process when we haven't read anything, someone else has did it for us?
That is very true, and I've also reflected on reflected on this idea of reading, and I've also written something on this, but I haven't published it on terms of generative AI and reading. Right now, my answer might surprise many of you, but I think this is what it is. Right? See, when we talk about reading as such, right? As long as writing exists, reading will never go away in that sense. Or as long as written text exists, reading will never go away. So even if you are interacting, even if you are putting up a text and then asking a query to generative AI to give you a summary of this text, obviously you will still have to read the summary in order to understand the argument that is there in the paper. That is one thing, right? But then obviously I understand your question. Your question is much more broader than that in terms of, okay, if you haven't gone through the whole text and all of those things, how do you understand the text in that sense, right? My simple answer is that my simple answer is this, right? With the coming of generative AI, we do not have to do that anymore now. We do not have to read through the whole text anymore now. Again, see, this is very important. This is one of the exercises that I do with my students in terms of reading, right? I give my students a PDF document, and I do this exercise with them, that I give a system prompt, a generative AI system prompt, where I say in the system prompt that, you ask some questions from the reading in the text that has been provided or that has been attached here in the chat, right? And the system prompt kind of prompts the student to actually find for an answer that is there in the text, and that prompts them to actually go and read the text or read the particular section, because whenever generative AI gives you a question, the generative AI will say that the answer to this will lie in this chapter or this page and all of those things. And so students go and then read the particular chapter, read the particular section as such, right? I mean, that is something which I do with my students in order to help them read in that sense. But again, see, if you are someone who knows, okay, what reading is, what are we trying to find in the process of reading a book in that sense, right? If you are reading a book which is about theories and all, or which is an ethnographic work, what are you trying to find? What are you trying to understand? And all of, if you know that, right, you will be able to comprehensively grasp that using generative AI to actually get that answer easily without going through that book. And so again, today we do not have to do the process anymore. The only thing that we need to learn is that, okay, if you're reading, only thing that any student have to learn is that if you're reading an ethnographic work, what is the nature of that ethnographic book? How do you get information from an ethnographic book? Right? What kind of information do you get from an ethnographic book? That is the thing that you can try to understand. A student can try to understand. As long as you understand that, you can use generative AI to actually kind of get any kind of responses to that in that sense, or any kind of response to any kind of text. So yeah, I mean, let me keep it there. Yeah.
Thank you, Sandeep. That was a very provocative question, and he also handled pretty well. Maybe you could also go back to Post-Print World by Catherine Hales. So that might help you to populate further questions and scenarios as far as your question on reading is concerned. Thank you, Sandeep, for that provocative question. So may I request Rashmi Chakrabarti to ask her question?
Hi, thank you, Rakesh. I'm Reshmi.
Yes.
So this question is actually an open floor question, and it's not really a question. It is also kind of collating my ideas, and this presentation today has extended this thought that while we are so much inclined towards bringing in AI into academics and really proliferating and maximizing our acumen to access knowledge, there are really better, I mean, there are more exemplary places where AI could be really, really helpful. That is to use it for vernacular translations, because so much gets lost when we are really reading a text of Foucault or Bourdieu. They've written in French, and we have taken it up to reading in English, and so much really gets lost when you read the original. It is simpler than this. But let us just bring it to India, and there are such great literature in so many languages, and and I think that that part where we are so hell-bent in, bringing it to the English, I think this is a great time to access such knowledge and use AI to the best of the potential. And we go back to probably reading, literature, just simple literature, poetry from Nagaland or from Assam. I work in the field of Assam, and my work is on secondary education and middle class. And, I'm just thinking really aloud that, wow, this is a great time to really use that literature. The second point, which is coming from from the previous question which was raised, that what is really getting lost when we are maximizing the use of AI. So there are two things probably which is happening. One is the hermeneutics is getting lost. So, the context, while we are trying to read a summary of, a Marxian work or Althusser or even prison notes, of Gramsci, that nuance of the the touch of humanity, the agony, the destitute within from which he was writing this, I think that part AI will not consider. It will give us right the summary, the exceptions of that writing. That is what the AI is continuously throwing at us. And yeah, in 5 to 8 years time, that hermeneutics of reading a text and going through the context will kind of get a little diluted. And this is what I believe. I think this is probably where we are headed. And the third point that I want to mention is that there is a particular reason that AI was definitely invented to ease our life. And did we really need it for academics? If so, then what is that residual time? What are we going to do with that residual time that we are going to save by using AI to read prison notebooks? So somewhere we are probably saving on some time and maybe go and play squash or maybe really exercise our leisure. So I think the impact on our leisure time, the impact on the residual time that probably will get saved if we are thinking time as a factor. If we are thinking time as a longitudinal thing where we are really only using it for academics, then are we talking about productivity where we are probably writing 3 more papers? And then I think the marginal gap between those who can access education and literature in English vis-a-vis those who are still at the margins and they are struggling from the vernacular universities. So these are the points that I just wanted to probably link with what today's lecture was being presented.
Yeah.
Thank
Well,
you.
that is very true. You see, in society, right, with the coming of different kind of technology, it says that it will make our life easier and all of those things, but it has never happened, right? People are always busy and all of it. Generative AI, even with the coming of generative AI, right, we will be always doing that. See, just a simple example, right? It's something like this. Now, today, these journals and all are flooded with research papers, which are actually written by generative AI. Now, these journals and all are flooded with papers which are, again, written by generative AI, again, is because, you see, in many of the instances, right, in research as such, you see, in research, people do not, publishing has become a business in that sense, right? As long as you give a different perspective, okay, fine, you get published in that sense. But then we do not think about, okay, will this idea work in the society? What kind of change will this idea bring? And all of those things are something which you do not care about, right? Journals are only care about as long as you have some good ideas or whatever in that sense, it can be published in that sense. Now that is changing, that will change in that sense. Obviously today it is not changing, but then in the years to come, it will change. Journals will say, oh, okay, you have a very good idea, perfectly written paper. We do not want that anymore. We want something very different in that sense. It will say like that in the days to come, in that sense. So again, the kind of things that the journal needs from you in that sense will change in that sense, right? Or another thing that can happen is that obviously that the journals and all feed all the paper through paper through generative AI, review it using generative AI, and just keep on publishing in that sense, right? who knows? But then obviously the way I think is that it will, journal will actually kind of, give a different kind of way about thinking about what your contribution in a research paper is in this sense, right? So that will actually change a lot dramatically in the years to come. I mean, this is just the way I think about it. Coming to the first question about vernacular language, right? See, now generative AI that we have today and that we use today is, again, foundationally built on English language. And it understands a lot about history, the language of English in this sense, right? And so this is where, right, if you actually look at India, some of the startups in India or different IITs in India are trying to actually build models which are very much vernacularly suited in that sense. But then the problem with this is to build this kind of models, right? Obviously, apart from needing a lot of money and all of those things, you actually need a big corpus of information on the people, the language that you're writing about. For example, I mean, I come from Nagaland, so that model will need a lot of information, or almost all the information that is there on Nagas, in that sense, the history, the language that they have spoken, all of those things, right? And deal with that, obviously, some of the so-called cultures, certain languages speaking people do not have that amount of written information as such in that sense, right? So that are being built. People are building it. In Indian context, IITs and different startups are building it, and hopefully they are able to build it up well in that sense. But then we do not have that much information compared to any kind of English language. So hopefully, that will be sorted out by them. And yeah. And the third thing about hermeneutics in that sense, right? And I think this is something which is very interesting and important as such in that sense, because when we say that, oh, generative AI can actually create a nice picture in that sense, and, someone who actually takes years and years to create some kind of painting or learn certain kind of painting as such, we say, oh, that the process of the toil that you go through to actually learn that painting and all of those things get lost and all of that is something which is very true as such. But then you see, when we talk about the nature of hermeneutics as such in the sense, right, the way we approach a text and understand the text and the context of it in the sense, right, it's also very much dependent on, as we all know these things very well as such. Even if you are reading a similar text as such, individual can come with different kinds of interpretation to the same text that we are reading as such. And it's very much, again, it's also because of the individual's leaning as such, right? What kind of ideas or ideology does the individual leans towards in that sense, right? So that becomes something which is very important. So again, my idea is that, again, hermeneutics is something which is, again, very much created by our own individual process of, the experiences that we go through, the learnings that we go through as such in that sense, right? And this is where, I would continue to argue that, obviously, that generative AI does not do away with this idea of hermeneutics as such, but then it just changes the way we human read and understand the context of a text as such. For example, let's say I'm reading something by something by philosopher in that sense, and that philosopher came up with a certain kind of concepts or idea. Now how the philosopher came up with the concept or idea is not discussed in the book, but then I feed that book in generative AI and then ask, how did this philosopher came up with this idea or concept as such? Then obviously the generative AI can go through the corpus of information that it has, or you can feed in the information yourself and come up with how the person has built up the context in that sense, right? And so this is where now the discussion is very different again. Because if I feed in the same information and other person feed in the same information and ask the same question, you are getting the same response in that sense. So now in this context, how do we think about hermeneutics in terms of, again, human interpretation of someone's experiences as such, or the meaning of text as such, right? The question to this becomes very different here. And this is where we need to start a different kind of discussion, even in hermeneutics using generative AI. Thank you. Yeah.
Yeah, I would like to extend Thia's statements on interpretation as a response to Rashmi. I think in 1980s, John Searle, the American philosopher, do talk about understanding and mimicking in terms of the computer programming, wherein which he problematizes whether a computer program really understands or programming. And I think that is still relevant in the context of AI, and especially in the way he had posed a question on interpretative capabilities. And somewhere I would like also to see it as a provocative way to ask the other way around. Where we in the business of over-interpretation, and in terms of a new big data, especially when we have big data, do we need an interpretative exegesis? I mean, I'm just throwing at it, right? So there are two streams that we can work around with that question, and that question is extremely productive. And thanks for this provocation. I think I would request Suraj to have a detailed conversation on this thing in the coming days, and especially the third question, which Tia also took on very well, is a question on what do we do in the residual time. And I think that's a brilliant question. I mean, in the sense that that takes us off to various levels. And thanks for these two provocations, especially. And I would urge you to go back to John Searle's 1980s Chinese room argument. I mean, it is a little divisive, but it is very contextual. So now I would request Atanu Bhattacharya to ask his questions. Atanu.
So I really enjoyed the talk, particularly the last few slides was illuminating for me, where the speaker is showing that the path to research has to be changed based on the available resources we have, this AI and ML. And that has changed my idea. Now, probably I have found a problem for the teacher. So as a teacher, we are still teaching or giving instructions following the traditional method. Traditional method such as, okay, follow the literature work or something. And then, but then in presence of AI, the instruction procedure will be changing completely. And it is our task as a teacher to find out what would be the new scheme of instruction which should be given to the students, so that now classroom would be more active, or the discussion session would be more engaging. Already it is evident that if we follow the traditional methodology of teaching in the classroom, students are getting bored just because of this AI, because the same information they can collect very quickly through ChatGPT. And I do not need to be another information provider, low-grade information provider. So it's going to be a big challenge for teachers. And now I know what to work on. I mean, these are commentary. It's beautiful. It's really, I really like this. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah. See, let me say something very short on this, right? See, what Sir Atanu has mentioned is very important.
I'm not from humanities background. I'm from science background, and I was wondering, what should we do? So your last few slides have really shown the path, and I'm going to work on that.
True. Yeah, true.
Thank you.
Because see, now as I've told you, it's more easier said than done. As I told you, is because see, if you are a research supervisor, and if you are your researcher is working under you in that sense, right? And if the researcher comes up with certain kind of information today, the discussion is not like where did you read this? How do you get this information as such? You also have to know which model did this person fit in the information to, and what kind of question that the person asks to the model in that sense. I'm talking about AI model in that sense, right? And so you yourself have to know how does that model, AI model, behave to certain kind of queries in that sense. And so now the whole interaction is about you also understanding, the whole idea of AI models as such, how this specific AI model behaves, how this specific AI model responds to certain kind of question, and deal with certain kind of ideas, concepts as such. Now the discussion should be on that in the sense, right? And that changes the game altogether, even in terms of any kind of research or research related discussion also in that sense. Yeah.
Thank you.
But
Suraj,
in the end,
sorry.
Just one point. In the end, let's say there is a shutdown, there is a power outage, and or in a remote village, the same methodology cannot be employed. So there would be some kind of inequality in the teaching learning process also, because it's highly dependent on the resources. Many schools don't have even those resources.
Yes.
So, okay, let's see. Okay, I stop here. Yeah.
True. And that is why, Oxford University is what it is. It has a name because of that, right? It has the resources, everything. It has given free ChatGPT access to everyone, the paid version, I mean. And so, yeah.
Yeah, thank you. So we have, I think now we have one question, rather provocation, Tia, from Suraj. So it's in the chat box. So if anybody else wants to add something more, they can welcome to do it in the chat box. So I'll just read out, Tia, for you what's there in the chat box. Thank you for your a very interesting take on generative AI. Just to provoke a discussion, he wants you to respond to this, I believe. What is the idea of learning we are left with when students use AI to write assignments and teachers are using AI to evaluate these AI written assignments? It's almost like bots interacting with bots, and humans are just happy watching this interaction. Yeah. So Thea, your comments and your observations, please. Yeah.
So, see, this is a problem with all the institutions, and I've written on this. And you can go and check out that. But so the thing here is, right, now we have to rethink assessment and grading. You see, now, I mean, what we used to do in terms of assessment is that, let's say, if you are talking about a written assessment, you give a topic and tell the student, go search for literatures, write this assessment, give me references, and then submit it to me, I'll check it. Now today, you know, we have to rethink assessment in terms of how can students use generative AI to actually write that assessment, right? And so now the idea here is that we need to change the nature of the assessment. And then, because now if we change the nature of the assessment where students are writing the assessment using generative AI, then we have to change the nature of grading also. Because the way we create an assignment or written assignment is something like this. Okay, is this argument good, right? This is person bringing good ideas. On all of those things we see, right? But that is something which you do not have to see anymore, because AI can put in, if you only put the idea, AI will give in good argument, good sentence, you know, good argument, put in good paragraph. We do not have to create that anymore. We need different kinds of metrics of grading now. And that is something which I have written about it. And this is a very big discussion in itself, in the sense. And this is something which I also practically teach it to teachers, in the sense where, you know, they have to sit with their laptop, and then I give them an assignment which they have to use generative AI to write that assignment, and the teachers themselves do the assignment, in the sense, and then I you know, bring in the rubric, and then I grade it and all of those things, right? So this is something which we have to rethink assignment and rubric altogether, but it can only be done again with a lot of practical example and exercise as such. But I've written something on this. You can have a look at it. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, can we take one very interesting question? Shubha has thrown in a very fascinating question. Can we, Tia? Do you have time?
Yeah. Yes.
Yeah. Yeah. So she wants you to respond to, what about the way people have started anthropomorphizing AI? Speaking about it as an actual person rather than as technology, or maybe I'll put in the word artifact. So what about we anthropomorphizing AI and saying it as more than as a technology, as, you know, something like as human? Because my own sister, who heads an innovation hub for a tech giant, her best friend is ChatGPT nowadays. She relies more on ChatGPT than human beings, and I am amazed by